Hi, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the I Owe It to Myself podcast. Super excited to have you guys here as we start a completely new series. So I decided that I wanted to start reading Crescent City, and so I have started the first book, and I'm recording. This is the first episode for the series for House of Earth and Blood. So this will be a read-along series for this book. We will see how many episodes we come away with, because if you are familiar, these books are very big. But I have been wanting to dive into this series for a while. I was blessed enough to get it for Christmas, so I decided that I wanted to go ahead and dive into it. There's a couple of things that I want to say before I start talking about the book and what I've read so far. In the past, I have done series for like the entire book series. And I really never intended to do that, but I think because I had had some episodes for the books I've read so far where I had done an entire book in one episode, it made the overall thing a lot shorter. And it just kind of worked out to say that the entire series of my episodes was for the entire series of like a book series, but that isn't really my intention. And the reason why I want to clarify this is because if you have been listening so far, but if you haven't, and if you're new here, you will come to know that I do several episodes per book, especially for a book like this. But in the past, I've been anywhere between 3 or 4 episodes per book. So when you think about doing that for a series that has 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 books, you're going to get a ton of episodes in that entire series. And for the purposes of the podcast, I just don't want to do it that way. I want each book to be its own series. So this is going to be the series of Crescent City Book 1, House of Earth and Blood. This is episode 1 of that series. And today we're going to be talking about chapters 1 through 19. So I've stopped at chapter 20. A couple of other things that I want to comment on is when I was thinking about this book and how big it was, I was thinking about how I parse it out. So it is about 800 pages of reading, and I thought, okay, I could do about 200 pages and then record. I also was thinking about the number of chapters, and there is about 100 chapters. So I thought, okay, instead I could do about 25 chapters and then record. I've stopped in the middle of that, and I'm going to keep in mind the 200 pages roughly, or, roughly 25 chapters per recording, because I don't necessarily want a ton of things to happen in this story without me being able to give my thoughts. Because if you have listened already, but again, if you haven't and you're new here, what you will come to find is, especially when I really enjoy the book, which thankfully everything I've recorded so far I've really loved, when I enjoy the book and the reading and the writing style, I get really excited. And so it is hard for me sometimes to read a lot without wanting to share my thoughts. I just feel like I'm going to explode with thoughts and feelings, so I want to share them. Here's the caveat with all of this. The thing that I want to stay true to is when I want to record. If I do feel like I've come across something really pivotal or some major stuff has gone down, but I haven't gotten through 200 pages or I haven't gotten through 25 chapters, whatever I've tried to parse out for myself, I don't want to limit myself. I want to be able to record, because that's the magic, in my opinion. Being that excited, sharing my organic thoughts, letting it roll off my brain as I'm thinking and feeling it, that's the good stuff. Again, this is a very hefty book. Already, I will say, I haven't had any problem getting through these 200 plus pages to where I am right now to do this recording, but also I have a lot of different feelings about where I'm at with this, which is obviously what we'll talk about. I want to lay the groundwork about what you could potentially expect, but I also want to be realistic about the fact that I'm going to, as always, be open with myself and flexible about how rigid I am with how much I read or how many chapters I get through before I record. All of that to say, let me set the stage a little bit. This is the first time that I am doing recordings for Sarah J. Maas content. When I wanted to start this podcast seriously and with some type of regular cadence, I had already read ACOTAR and I was finishing up Throne of Glass. And trust me, the way that I leaned into that writing, I wished that I was in a place to record those and to do all of those books. So much so that I really did struggle with the fact of, do I reread ACOTAR just to do recordings for those books? And I ultimately decided not to do that yet. The thing that I think will benefit me is two parts. One of them relates to this book, and one of them relates back to both of those series. For both of those series, there's so much that happens and so many things that get connected back to what you've read in the past and so many Easter eggs. I am the kind of reader that when I'm really liking the writing and I'm excited about the story, I just charge through the book. And I also am the kind of person that, admittedly, I can miss the smallest of details. So when I would see people talk about these books online and some of the theories that they made and the connections, I was just blown away because I was like, dang, I really wasn't tracking that, or I didn't pick that up. And it made me appreciate the series and her writing even more, but it did also make me want to read it again. As far as I can remember off the top of my head, I've never reread a series. I don't know that I've ever read one more than once. And it feels like a little bit of a crime for me to say that, doing what I do and loving books as much as I do. But I think part of it is that, one, you just love the experience for what it was the first time, especially if you really love the writing and the story and the characters. But also, it's like, you know what the experience was. How can you put yourself through it again, especially if something, so intense and heavy happens? I do think that I will reread ACOTAR again for the sake of being able to hopefully pick up on different things the second time around, and because I loved the series so much. I'm also interested to see how I perceive it knowing everything that I know now. So I say all of that to say, I do think that there is a world in which I read it again, and it could be that I do it leading up to when the newest book is going to come out, whenever we get information about that happening. The other thing I'll say really quickly before I talk about this series is Throne of Glass. It's in the same boat for me, but it is such a commitment because of the number of books that I will also say, I think I really like Throne of Glass more than ACOTAR, but they're so close and I like them for different reasons. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I will talk about that at a time whenever I do record for those series. But I think that if I was to record for ACOTAR, knowing that I'm recording for Crescent City now, I think I would have to reread Throne of Glass. The harder part about that is I don't think we're going to get any other Throne of Glass books, and I'm okay with that. I think it's perfect the way that it is. But I also think that because of that, it lends itself to reading it again, because you kind of know what you're going to get. You know that there's nothing more coming, and because you just want to pick up all of the Easter eggs and really appreciate different things about it the second time through. So I'm not committing now to doing that for either of those series, but it is in the back of my mind because I really appreciate the writing style and I love those books so much. Now, how does that relate to where we are right now? I don't exactly remember when I finished the Throne of Glass series, but it was definitely like in the fall of last year. So I'm doing this episode right now in January of 2026. So it has easily been 3 or 4 months since I've finished that series. And obviously way longer since ACOTAR, since I read that first. I'm mentioning that because I think it's been a good amount of time for me to almost have a little bit of a clean slate and a clean palette of how Sarah J. Maas was writing for those stories. And I think that that is actually an important thing for Crescent City, because if I had started Crescent City immediately coming off of Throne of Glass and expecting what I got in that series and similar to ACOTAR, I don't think that I could read this series with the same, I don't think that I could really give it as much of a chance as I am now. So I went into this series knowing that this was a very different story, very different type of characters and world. Obviously a lot of similarities, and I've seen some of that already, but it's completely different. And even though Throne of Glass and ACOTAR are different. Their circles overlap, in my opinion, at least so far. I mean, again, I'm only like 19 chapters into this book of 3 huge books, so my opinion on this could completely change. But to me, the circles of what ACOTAR is and what Throne of Glass is overlap pretty decently. With this, I feel like Crescent City's overlap is a lot smaller, at least right now. And I think it's just because this is such a different environment. Obviously, that is a big part of what I'm going to talk about when I'm giving you my thoughts and feelings about these initial chapters. But I wanted to say all of that to set the stage that I think I've done myself a service by giving myself time to step away from SJM's writing, to read other things. I literally came in with zero expectation. I just wanted to be open-minded to what these characters were going to be and what this story was going to be. All of that to say, let's go ahead and dive into the first 19 chapters of this book. What I will say is that it was apparent to me immediately that the initial information in this book was all about setting the stage and like world building. I don't know that at this point in time, I'm actually pretty confident that I don't understand everything about these characters and how they relate to each other, how the houses work, how the different parts of this world work, this town work. There's a lot of information that you get. And in the first couple of chapters, it's actually almost to a point where it's off-putting. There was just a lot being said that you have no context for. A lot of really important people being mentioned, houses being talked about, the way that different creatures interact with each other, what different creatures are. There's just, if you gave me trivia right now about any of that stuff, I don't know how much I would get right. Here's the other thing that I will say though, on the other side of that same coin. Part of me appreciates it because I know that I could go back to those pages even now, right? And maybe I'll do that before I start diving into chapter 20 and reading forward. I could go back to those sections of the book, the very beginning couple of chapters, and glance through them, right? And I could skim them and I could use them as context for these houses and interactions I come across to remind myself, because I know that they're there and I know that there's a good amount of information there. So in a way, I think that that's good and it's helpful, but I think it creates a little bit of a barrier to entry. But if I know anything about SJM, it's that regardless of how you start, she's going to cook. She's going to give you all of that same stuff that was magic in ACOTAR and TOG. It's the Easter egg planting and then bringing it back up chapters or books later and making your mind so blown that you're like, how the hell does she do it? So I already know, I have no doubt in my mind, which is why I'm willing to stay open-minded to continue pushing forward, because I have no doubt in my mind that I'm going to get some good shit out of this. I really do believe that because I just think she's that phenomenal of a writer. So what you'll know if you've already read these chapters is that you get a lot of information also, like when you start getting into the story past a lot of the history and kind of the groundwork, and you really get into who Bryce is and what her day-to-day is and who the people in her life are, there is a lot of mention about Danica pretty quickly. Like there's a point where I clocked it and I was like, why are they saying her name so much? I could almost preemptively know that something was going to go down. And I don't know that that's necessarily an SJM thing. It might just be me picking up on that from, I don't know, all the books I've read or shows I've watched where you get this feeling that they're doing it intentionally and it's for a reason. In this case, it ended up not being a good reason, but I was like, they're mentioning this person a lot. And I think it's either going to be, I was like forming hypothesis in my mind about what it was going to be, loosely, of course, because it was so early on in the book. But I was like, this is a lot and overwhelming, and there's a reason to this. They started to do that with Connor a little bit too. And before I knew it, before you could even get down the rabbit hole of what could happen between Bryce and Connor and this relationship, they obviously were all taken from Bryce's life. And what I will say is it was a little bit shocking to go from having all this kind of like historical things and stuff mentioned about this world. And again, all these characters and people and whatever, not really understanding, to getting this look into Bryce's life and being like, damn, she's a partier. She's pretty reckless, all this kind of stuff, to the way in which these characters died. It was like a slap in the face, and it was gruesome. And the way that certain things were mentioned, it was like you went from this kind of, not fluffy, that is not the right word at all, but you just went from feeling like you were kind of settling into what the writing style was going to be and the vibe was going to be, to this very intense, brutal situation. Like, everything about it, from the time that she realizes her friends have died to the end of like the interrogation situation, it was just graphic and pretty brutal in my opinion. And it felt pretty jarring because everything leading up to it felt so not that. Obviously that is intentional. What I think is happening in those chapters by way of the writing style is you were to feel the intensity of what Bryce felt in that having happened in such a tragic and gruesome way. It's supposed to be that impactful to you. So you don't see it coming. You're out with her partying. You're in this hazy land of drug and alcohol with her. And your reality, your snapback to reality is as intense and sudden as hers is. It's supposed to be that way, if I have any understanding of the kind of writer that SJM is. But damn, it was like, oh, okay, this is what we have potential to get into in this book. Like, we're not messing around. Like, this is for real, for real. So that snaps you into a place very quickly where when you go into the story that you're in now, your mind is in a different place and you're ready and you're there with Bryce. And I just appreciate the hell out of that kind of writing style. So the first, few chapters are all of that context, a little bit of world building, kind of knowing where Bryce was at and how she was living her life, to this huge reality check. And then you're in the current story that you're in now, almost 2 years later, in present day, in a very different headspace than when you started this book. All of that to say, reading through 19 chapters, I don't feel like I have a solid sense of exactly the vibe of this book. And I'm okay with that. I don't know that I can even articulate this well, but you see that the type of character that Bryce is misunderstood and mysterious, even to you as a reader. Because as much as we know about her, as much as we know that she knows people doubt her, she knows that people totally misjudge her, and she is capable of so much. She plays that to her advantage. She's cunning, she's smart, she is capable. We know all of those things, but there's a lot of question marks around Bryce for me already. And I think that because of other characters in this book, I think that she is easily going to evolve into something more. And I think that that's likely because that is what has happened for the other female main characters in SJM stories, right? In ACOTAR, Feyre obviously morphed into something completely different than when she started in that book. Same thing with Selena in Throne of Glass. She came out the gates being pretty brutal and capable, but she even continued to morph into something different and beyond as a character. It's no doubt in my mind that that's going to happen here with her. And here's a couple of reasons why I think that. Not just because of the other female main characters, but in this story, we know that Bryce has a half-brother, Rune. And he is, some of the best for the type of creature that he is and all of this kind of stuff in this world that they live in. They haven't admitted to the world that they're half siblings. The people in the public think that they're distant cousins. It is going to inevitably come out that they are closer than that in blood relation, and that's going to mean something. I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's going to be the case. Rune's father is such a powerful and prominent person, and that is Bryce's father, that reinforces what I had just said about how it's going to matter when it comes out that they're half siblings. But even beyond that, something that I found interesting was as we get to know Rune more, what we have found out is that him and Bryce have bonded in the past. And even now, when they're at odds with each other, they bond over this fact that they don't really like their father. And they don't care for the way that he moves around the world and just is as a person. But Rune is closer to his dad for a lot of reasons. Bryce is completely removed and almost dismissed because she's half human and half fae. So he doesn't really claim her. And because he didn't claim her fully as his child, that is one, why the world doesn't know about it, but two, why she only has like a little bit of this fairness. And from what I understand, why she doesn't have more. If he had fully claimed her, I think that the capabilities she would have and the power that she would have would be different. I don't know if it would fully change her from being half fae, half human to full fae. I don't think I have enough understanding to know if his claiming of her as his child would change that, but I think it would increase her fairness way more than it is now. I think that is going to play a role into the character that she becomes. I think she is capable of a lot more. And the other reason why is because part of Rune's damage with his dad is that he takes after his mom and like the powers that her side of the family has to his father's disapproval. From what I understand, there was nothing that could have been done by it. It's just the way that the cards were dealt. But as from Rune's perspective in the book, as he talks about or interacts with Bryce, he comments on how much he sees his father in her, and even like their hair and like the certain expressions on their face, all this stuff. He even talks about how it's dumbfounding to him how people haven't connected the dots, that they are more closely related. And even if his friends have, they haven't said anything, right? But I think that those are the Easter eggs that are going to matter. I think it's going to end up being a reality that she is going to have more of the power of the father. And all this time that he's kind of disowned her and dismissed her because she's a half and half, I think that it's going to end up being in her favor in his eyes that she's going to have his power. And it's obviously not going to matter at that point. If that happens, she's still going to, like, in my opinion, if I know anything about what these characters are and how SJM writes, she's still going to disown him and not want to have anything to do with it. But I think it's going to change. I think the tides are going to change in terms of this relationship that these three have, the two kids with their father, and how he relates to them in a huge way. This is my guess. The third reason why I'm hypothesizing this is because they've already talked a lot about how you have to make this drop. Anybody who's fae has to make this descent and go through this process of like accepting and taking and surviving this gift of immortality. She hasn't done that yet. I think that we're going to see a lot of character development when she does that for a lot of the reasons I've mentioned in terms of her power and like leveling up her as a character. But also you have to have an anchor that keeps you like anchored to the current world when you go and you do this drop. And hers would have been her friend, but her friend died. And so I think that it will either be Rune or this other character, Hunt, who are both kind of on the outskirts of her life in terms of like she's not close to them, but she tolerates them. But they're both pushing in more and more and more in her story. And I think they're going to both become very integral parts of her life. And there's going to become some type of like symbiotic relationship between the three of them. Because right now, Rune and Hunt don't get along with each other. They're at odds with each other, but their commonality is her, and they just want her safe. But I think that this triangle is going to be hugely important in these characters' lives and in the development of all three of them. And I think that all of these dynamics are going to play a part into how Bryce as a character evolves. So at only 19 chapters in, that's a lot to hypothesize and think about. But I think I pull it from knowing SJM from the other series that I've read and just kind of seeing the way that some of these stones are being placed as I follow along on this journey already. This is what I'm already strongly believing. Now, obviously, the downside with having such strong thoughts or hypothesis early on is that may not happen. I've been lucky enough so far to not be so blinded by that I'm like disappointed by other things that happened. It can make it a little bit exciting too, to have your hypothesis both either come true or not, and to be surprised by what you find instead. So I'm still going into this being open-minded, but I think that these types of things and all of these characters we've seen so far, it's the groundwork for the huge transformation that Bryce is going to take as a character. I guess the last point that I'll make about it is even already, Bryce moves in this world with some skeevy characters and in some types of dealings she shouldn't really be in because of her being disowned by her father and because of some of the people who she was friends with. That it benefits her though. It gives her access to things in ways that these men can't because they're both in this like authority in this world with different entities, but they have this authority that people of certain parties or neighborhoods or groups don't want to interact with them, but she can. And that's already the advantage we're seeing Bryce have in these chapters and why she's involved with them in the way that she is, because she needs to be able to talk to those people. But what it is also establishing is that she can handle herself to a degree. She may be half human, but like she's got balls of steel, and that is earning her respect. And if anything, that is also a commonality that SJM writes into her female characters. Some are more timid than others, but it may not be right away, but they will own a room that they are in due time, if not immediately, and they are fearless, albeit they may have hesitancy or doubts, and there, of course, there is some fear in there, but in the eyes of others, and especially in the eyes of strong men in their lives, they don't balk. And that is also a consistency that has happened in the female characters that SJM writes about that I've already seen in these chapters. So I am excited. I am not deterred by that. There is a blueprint that she creates for her female characters, and I've already am seeing that by ways of what I'm commenting on in this episode, and I'm okay with that because I have liked the other stories that I've read, and I am going to commit to staying open-minded that I'm going to like the outcome of it here. The last thing that I really want to say about all of this is that this whole world is very interesting to me. The writing here seems a little bit young. And what I mean by that is not in style, but like the characters feel young to me. But again, you're playing with this reality that some of these characters have been alive for hundreds of years already, but they may present in bodies that are, 30, 40, 50 years old. That's just the way that the magic in this world works, right? But there's just a side of innocence, I think, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is or where that comes from. I think if I had to put it anywhere, it's the humanness that Bryce has. I think that there's a layer of her that is aged beyond her years because of what she's faced and how she carries herself, which I can relate to and I understand. And I, again, am used to seeing because of the other characters I've read that SJM has written about. But there is a little bit of innocence there, and I think it is the juxtaposition of how strongly she writes her female characters, but also the fact that there's a softness to them that needs to be coddled. I don't like that word really in this case, but it is, that needs to be catered to because they deserve that. They deserve to be in their feminine, and they deserve to be able to let the walls down. And inevitably, with these female characters, somebody comes along that allows them to do that. That's part of what makes the relationship between the male and the female characters in SJM's books so good, in my opinion. I'm okay with that trope. I'm okay with that type of relationship. I know that Bryce will get that. Is she going to get that out of Hunt? I don't know. The groundwork is being laid for that already, and I think some really sexy stuff could come out of that. But is it going to be him forever and for the end of time? I don't know. But I say all of that to go back to my point. There's just a little bit of youth that I feel like is there. And I always have a little bit of a hard time placing that with the age that some of these characters have and the wisdom that they're supposed to have. Even with someone like Hunt, the way that she writes his reactions to a character like Bryce, the innocence, the playfulness, it just feels young. He is not this aged character that is in this young body. He feels youthful. And maybe it's because even if he is, hundreds of years old or decades old or whatever in this young body, in the span of a life that should be eternal, he is young. So it doesn't matter that we're talking about decades or hundreds of years or centuries or whatever. He is still young in the overall span of what could be forever. Maybe that's it, and maybe that's the point. Is it doesn't really matter about the number. It just matters about where you're at in terms of your overall timeline. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm just trying to connect the dots of how she time and time again talks about these characters that have such an age to them and experience, but yet there's this youthfulness there. All of that to say, we're in the early stages of still knowing Bryce, of knowing Rune, of knowing Hunt, of other characters in this story that have come up already. I don't really want to comment too much more on them or where I think it's going to go. What I will say to round this out is right now I'm most interested in Rune and Bryce's relationship. I really am curious of what's going to happen there. I have a little bit of a hard time seeing them as brother and sister. It doesn't quite resonate with me just yet, and I don't know if that's intentional, but I'm being open-minded that I need to really create them as brother and sister, but I don't quite feel it yet. With Hunt, I think because I'm of the assumption that he's going to be a love interest, and that because some bricks have been laid for that to be the case, I kind of have categorized him in knowing where he falls with her and what that's going to look like. So I'm not too curious about that. I'm excited for it, but I kind of know where he's going to live. I could be wrong about so many things and the way that these characters are going to evolve, but I feel like I just needed to get through the first couple of chapters of this book and really into things, and especially the point when shit hits the fan for Bryce and she kind of catapults into the present day. I mean, that's brutal. And I think that was the key thing to kind of get through to really get this story moving. Sorry, the last thing that I'll say is I am interested to see how the working relationship with Bryce and Hunt evolves. I think he already has respect for her. I want to see how she earns respect for him. There's respect there because of who he is and what his name carries and the things she knows about him as this like kind of godly figure. But I want to see what it looks like when she personally gains respect for him, and same for Rune. I think that there's a disconnect there that she needs to like regain respect and allow them to like come into her life in a more personal way. And I'm interested to see how that, like what the thing is that makes that happen for each of those characters with her. So much more book to go. I mean, at this point, again, we've read through chapter 19. I'm going to pick up at chapter 20. I'm over 200 pages into this book, 800 pages total. So not even a third of the way, not even close to half of the way. Really excited about what's to come, liking what I'm reading so far. And I hope that you are too. So as always, please make sure that you stay connected with us on Instagram. YouTube is where I'm posting, so you can listen to the episodes there, which you would know because you're already here listening now. I do a little bit of activity on TikTok, just trying to figure out how to do all of these socials and kind of balance them and find my groove for all of them. But I really hope that you're excited about this read along. I hope that you're excited about Crescent City. I want to know if this is the first series that you're reading of SJM, if it's the second, if it's the last, like me. Where do you fall? What do you think of her writing style? What do you think of the characters so far? Definitely share all of your thoughts and feelings with me on YouTube in the comments and let me know. And definitely like and subscribe. Make sure notifications are on so you know when we post new episodes. And I'm really excited to see what comes of the rest of this read along for this book. So thank you all again for being here and for listening. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time, friends.